welcome to SAP Network Plus. Thank you everybody who's tuning into this live. This is a second in the series of webinars focused on successful S/4HANA enabled business transformations. Today's is focused exclusively on the retail side of things, but of course the tips are transferable across all different industries. We are really happy to have this platform to engage with you all. My name is Jonathan. I'm one of the co-founding directors here at Blue Wave Select. And for those of you not entirely familiar with us, we are Europe's highest rated SAP recruitment agency, and in collaboration with the UK and I SAP user group, co-creators of SAP Network Plus. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by our guest, Paul Drage, and a very good friend of mine. Very quickly to introduce you, Paul, to our audience. Your background is 25 years exclusively in the retail industry, moving up through a retail business background as supply chain manager and head of merchandising. You've got deep expertise across retail business processes and speak the language of the retail business. Around 15 years ago, you moved into SAP program leadership roles, working with brands like Best Buy, Grand Vision, the Co-op, Mall, and Booking.com. So currently you're at Greggs as their SAP program manager for their S4 enabled business transformation. So today we've got about 30 minutes, which I know for us, Paul, based on our usual chats, is going to prove quite a test. But of course, we're not talking about Hyrox or Iron Man, so we should be all right, I think. I'll aim to keep us on track and concise to cover everything around the key components of a successful S4 implementation. And for everybody in the live, the chat box is open. We'll answer any questions with you directly after the webinar. So the session will also be recorded. So if you do miss anything, or if you want to listen to anything back, you can. Or if you want to share the content with anybody else in your network, by all means, feel free. So, should we cut straight to the chase? I'm keen to hear your thoughts, Paul. So, in your opinion, where do we begin?
No, thanks for the invitation, Jonathan, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone. And as Jonathan alluded, we quite often have some very good, deep, meaningful chats, specifically around sports that we have interest in. So I try to stay away from that today, Jonathan. I have got my England top on. I don't have an England football top, but this is me showing my willing support. So as you say, I've been working in retail since about 2000, just before 2000. I'm very much started on the business side, so from an operations background. So really buying supply chain merchandising, as you say. And then really sort of my first involvement in SAP, and I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from, and I can talk about where we got to. I was, I think I was head of merchandising for those of you who remember Threshers, who were a 3,500 strong off-license chain. And I was asked to come and help put a benefits case together for what ended up being an ERP implementation, ultimately enabled by SAP. And then before I knew it, I was asked to kind of come and help work on the program. And before I knew it, I was sort of business leading on the program. And to be honest, I never really looked back. So sort of, I always say that sort of that job at Threshers and then the subsequent sort of move to Best Buy was a real turning point for me. So I'd gone through a number of years of supply chain management, merchandising management, buying, a number of seasonal plans, seasonal buying, and I really got the hook on transformation programs. So I joined Best Buy actually primarily to head up one of their merchandising functions, but quickly got involved in their SAP implementation. So they came over to the UK from the US in 2000 and I think this was now 8-9 to sort of expand into international markets and wanted to set up their I guess their UK retail offering based on an SAP platform. And quite quickly I ended up running that SAP program for UK. And it really, at that point, I thought, blimey, you know, this is fun. It's every program's different. Every retailer has its different opportunities, its different strengths, its different weaknesses, and I've sort of thrived ever since. And I think for me, one of the key things that's sort of common to all of the programs I've worked on that have, you know, that have had its successes and had some of its challenges is, can we stand up in front of the entire sort of program team and the wider business with a very simple, I call it an elevator pitch, sort of a statement that everyone can get behind as to why are we doing the program. And it's been quite interesting over the sort of the course of the 20 years, because at the beginning of it, of course, it was quite about, well, actually a lot of retailers had grown quickly, either through rapid growth or most commonly through acquisition, which basically meant they sort of inherited a bunch of legacy IT applications that didn't really talk to each other. So they couldn't leverage this sort of, I guess, this sort of common huge power they have in sort of forming large groups. So originally, the sort of the elevator pitch used to be a lot around, but we want to sort of harmonize our processes, leverage our global buying capability. We want to be able to see sort of end-to-end transactions in the business and make better informed decisions, whether it's forecasting, replenishment, etc. So it was sort of mostly driven around that. And it's sort of shifted a little bit over the last 5 to 10 years, particularly as S4's come on, because what we're seeing is a lot of retailers moving from their incumbent ERP system, could be SAP, it could be Oracle, it could be another, to S4. And quite a lot of the reasons as to the why were done in the first implementation. So, you know, that sort of insight into making better forecasting decisions, that insight into leveraging our sort of common global buying capability, etc., was done the first time. The second time has been a little bit more difficult. So quite often, you know, it starts with a sort of, well, actually, we've got an end of life product, as we all know. SAP are currently putting ECC end of life 2027, but actually, you know, that's not always a reason to get behind a program, you know, just because we've got to do it. So become a little bit more difficult, but it's still important to try and find that elevator pitch. So what we are seeing now, sorry, John, and what I've definitely seen is, so it's quite interesting. 2019 was the last program that I did that implemented a sort of a greenfield ECC program. So that's only 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, the actual sort of SAP retail map in terms of merchandise assortment planning, you know, forecasted replenishment, going truly omni-channel, looking at sort of margin optimization, you know, etc., was still a little bit hazy. And actually, if you spoke to SAP at the time, it was, you know, the roadmap was clear and it was strong, but it wasn't quite there yet. And what we're seeing now since 2019 is some real strengths coming in with the SAP retail landscape, particularly on the card platform. So that's the customer activity repository. So we've got some real strong statements now, particularly looking at the opportunities we've got on cards. So whether that is opportunities through the unified demand forecasting tool, opportunities through the POS DTA platform, or opportunities through some of them, you know, one of the many things they're putting on there, you know, promotions management, price elasticity, all that sort of good stuff. So there really is that sort of optimization opportunity going further beyond. So, but as I say, I think that's always really key, is to be able to just have a look, stand up, and just be able to say in one sentence or two the why.
Yeah, nice and simple for everybody at CXO level down to shop floor.
Yeah, exactly that.
The reasons. Yeah,
exactly. You know, that one or two simple words is also a good sort of sense check, as when you're going through the program and saying, well, actually, you know, you always look at every stage gate. Are we still realizing what we wanted to do as to the start? And obviously, after we've gone live as well, an opportunity to sort of see how we're progressing from a post-implementation. So I think that's really key. And you know, there's never been a program that I've worked on that doesn't have that, because you know it's really important.
Yeah.
I think then the other challenge you've got is, you know, every program, everyone in this meeting, I'm sure, has been on you know, many different programs. Every program obviously has a different team, whether that's an internal team or an external team, quite often both. And these programs really sort of live and die by their resourcing. And I think for me, that's something that I've always tried to make number one priority, to be honest, as we start a program, is making sure we've got the right resource on the program. And we spend a lot of time, obviously, in retail and other industries, looking at onboarding the right systems integrator, if we're going down that route, to come on board, who understands our business, who can speak our language and work well with the team. But quite often we overlook how we're going to resource that internally. And I think that's, for me, lessons learned is, you know, there's sort of two ways of internally resourcing a program. One is a sort of we've got some resourcing that we, not 100% sure what to do in the future, but we can spare them up for the program. Or we've got some resources that actually I want to stand fully behind the program, because these programs, let's be honest, aren't IT programs, they're transformational programs.
Yeah.
We really look for, sorry, go ahead, John.
No, I was just saying, agreeing with you, Paul, really, it's a business program, isn't it? It's not just for technology's sake.
Absolutely, yeah. So what we look for is, if you think about these transformation programs, right, in retail, you typically have a number of functions, right, that represent the program, whether that's supply chain, buying, merchandising, finance, master data, etc. But basically, these work streams that sit within the program structure. And what we try and look to do is resource these work streams to have a true business lead sort of running the program. And what we really look for is, you want someone who is highly influential within that business function, in this business as usual role, and highly respected, because that person or those people are going to be making some very sort of empowered decisions on behalf of the program as to what the future state operating model could look like, what the future state process could look like. But actually, what's more important is, these programs, it always fails to amaze me. You can do some great planning, some great communications, great town hall type comms, but actually the programs live and die by those conversations that you have on the stairwell or in the lift or the water cooler. And these influential program workstream leads are really the first change agents. So they're the ones that are saying, how good the program's doing, the challenges that it's got. So for me, it's quite often overlooked, and we spend a lot of time giving that internal resourcing as well as external resourcing right. Do we always get it right day one? No. But don't be afraid to course correct as we go through. So I think that's, that'd be the second thing for me, is
get the
spend a lot of time. Yeah, exactly. We spend a lot of time, let's be honest, going through an RFI and RFP process with our external SIs, quite rightly, and we want to make sure we've got the complement on the internal piece as well. I remember my first program, going back to the days in Treasures, and I was originally sort of put on there as the stream lead for, I had buying, I had supply chain, I had franchise, I had wholesale, I had merchandising, and it was just overwhelming, and I sort of pleaded and eventually got the right resourcing in, and it made such a difference.
Right. Yeah. So with that, Paul, then you're talking about the internal resources coming from the business that are already engaged initially, on the permanent side, the kind of A-star team that understand the business inside and out, but also bringing on independent experts when needed to kind of supplement that team. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you'll find is, obviously, the reason you want internal resourcing as well is you want people who are going to be change agents and sort of land the program internally. But what you also often find is a little bit of, what's the right word? A bit of wariness or worrying from the internal teams, whereas they're thinking, I'm incorporating to this program, and actually I'm putting in this big technology that I've heard so much about called SAP, and they're a little bit unsure as to about where to focus. So quite often, as you were saying, John, we will look to sort of augment some of the internal teams with external resources who have come from a similar background to myself, come from multiple SAP retail implementations, because they can really help put a sense of calmness into the business teams, and you can. Well, let me think of an example. I had a program where we had a number of the workstream leads sort of really concerned about have we really designed the right processes and worrying about the entire thing. Right. Whereas actually, when you get into sort of external resources coming in, and you've got people that are saying, well, actually, do you know what, SAP is really strong in these finance areas. It's got new capability here, so let's really dial in this area. Great example at the moment is where we've got forecasting and replenishment being replaced by UDF on multiple programs. People have really understood the capabilities of the unified demand forecasting and its capability, I guess, across, e-commerce, bricks and mortar stores, click and collect, where the franchise, wholesaling, etc. Really can have those assurances to the business teams as, yes, focus on this rather than the whole. So you really drive the sort of the benefits you're looking for. So absolutely, where needed, absolutely look for that external resource that can come in and help you deliver the program. I mean, it saves you worrying about everything, but it also helps you sort of bring in the project sort of as quickly and as timely as possible. So fully agree with that.
Well, yeah, engaging with someone like yourself, that it's the lessons learned over the last couple of decades. You can save a lot of time and pain if you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting. I sort of, I've worked, as you say, predominantly in retail. I came from, I guess, just from a financial services program, which is what it predominantly was, and in booking just coming. And it's quite interesting how the sort of the two sectors are very different. You've got you've got these new sort of, what on the face of it is like an e-commerce website in Booking.com, and its competitors, but actually behind it is a very sort of tech-savvy company. So yeah, it's been quite interesting how we go about sort of resourcing and defining the program, which I think is the next thing for me. Is the start of the program is always interesting, aren't they? So we talked about trying to get the right resourcing. We talked about trying to get the understanding of why we're trying to do it. And actually, you then sort of going, okay, let's jump in to try and design what we're trying to do to deliver the why. And it's been interesting. I've worked over a number of years on classic waterfall programs. I've worked on hybrid programs. I've worked on purely agile programs, and they all have their merits, of course. But I think really, if you're putting an ERP system in, something like SAP, and particularly in retail, if you think about SAP being, I always call it like the brain of the retail operations, but it needs to talk to point of sales within the stores. It might need to talk to an e-commerce system. It might need to talk to a third-party delivery, like Deliveroo or like Uber Eats, etc.
Right.
It might need to talk to manufacturing, warehousing, all that sort of stuff. So the reality is, in that first instance in the design phase, you've really got to understand and design your processes, making sure SAP can speak to all of those systems and understand each other.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to go through those, order to cash, purchase to pay, etc., key processes on an end-to-end life cycle. Because the other key thing that's always challenging in these programs, and it's quite interesting. I always say, unless you have infinite time, when you go live with an SAP program, you'll have two challenges: data and interfaces. So in that design phase, you've got to come up with a common data model that enables the SAP system to receive messages and send messages to all of those other systems it's talking to in a common language. So I think, my experience says you've got to start with an element of a waterfall classic design methodology to understand how it's going to hang together. After that, when you're looking sort of, the detailed design, the sort of the building phases, the testing phases, there are for sure some stuff you can agile deliver. Reporting is a great example of that. But I think, lessons learned for me, if you try and jump straight into agile, it's quite difficult because you've got SAP talking to. I think the most I've had about over 200 systems on a program. So it's SAP talking to 200 different systems, across all of these retail platforms, its banks, its customers, etc. So it's just making sure that we understand that. So that would be another thing I would say.
Right. Oh, very good. And the next point is, don't treat it like an IT upgrade, like an iPhone upgrade.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So going back to sort of at the beginning, you talk about the why. As I said, it was relatively simple 10, 20 years ago because a lot of retailers didn't have an ERP system, so there were some very quick wins. And now you sort of see, well, actually, you've got SAP. A lot of the customers I'm working with are going from ECC to S4. And it can just be seen as, well, I've got an iPhone 14, I'm going to an iPhone 15, I'm just putting the latest software in. So yeah, it's well, you'll all know that on here, right? It's really not that. The other challenge, or the other, not challenge, wrong word. The other thing that a lot of people are doing at the moment is obviously migrating away from on-premise to the cloud. So there's also that element of it as well. But it's really, if you're doing a new greenfield implementation or brownfield implementation, or a straight like-for-like swap, you've got to see it as a transformation, because that's what it is. For those of you who've seen S4, even the user interface is different to the legacy ECC system. So there are change elements all the way through the program. So that's why I think it's really important. You've got business function representations in there. You've really got a clear why, you've got a clear design phase. And actually what I like to try and do at the end of that design I talked about at the beginning is really get it back into the hands of the business teams to sign that design off. And the analogy I always use, I always like, is one of the programs I ran back in very early was it Jack Wells. They were putting SAP in, and I sort of stood up there and I said to the directors of the board at the time, it would be fantastic at the end of design, you as one of the business heads of function, could put your hand up and say, I'm Paul, you know, I'm the head of supply chain, and I understand this SAP transformation is going to give me these processes, this capability, these benefits. This is the change I'm going to go through. This is any organisation design I need, and I'm fully behind it. And I think it's really important to get a design signed off, because that gives you your baseline scope, which is always a difficult thing to control. So I always like to try and do that, and you know, doing that.
Fully,
yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's what leads me on to the next point, which was is trying to establish a sort of clear program governance, and that governance can change, you know. So if you take a classic program, it goes through design, or may go even before that, it might go through an analyze phase, then it go through a design phase, then it go through a build phase, a testing phase, and ultimately a go live phase. It's having that clear governance in place and really understanding, I guess, the RACI, what each of those governing bodies. And then really, you know, we want to make sure that every time we move through the program, end of design phase, we look back and say, have we delivered what we said we were going to deliver as to why we're doing the program? You know, it's simple governance can have a look at that and go, yes or no. Have we finalized, finished the design? Have we understood all of the developments we need to make, and are we ready to go into the next phase, which could be building stuff? So that governance structure is really important, and it needs to be clearly communicated. I've seen fantastic over elaborate governance, but ultimately, at the end of the day, right, you've got a team that needs to sign off processes, you know, a team that needs to sign off the technical capability to deliver those processes, a team that understands how we're going to bridge the gap between where we are today and where we need to be tomorrow. You know, so those new processes could be as simple as just training someone to do them. It could be an organization redesign. It could be a development to get to that new process, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, really we're looking for, have we got control of our processes? Have we got control of our technology delivery? Have we got control about delivering our benefits, the bit I talked about at the beginning? And does it go back to the, you know, the why? And ultimately, you know, these programs deliver on three things: time, cost, and quality. And then, of course, you're looking at every single stage gate, so exiting design, saying, are we still on budget? Are we still within cost? Is the quality, i.e. the scope that we said we were going to do at the beginning, still there? And that's the question we should ask ourselves every time we go to the next step. And this governance, the program governance, is there really to assure that, yep, we are, and we can move on, or no, let's wait a second. Or quite often there's a sort of hybrid, right? You say, yep, we've done 90%, these 10% will carry into the next phase with an accepted risk. So I think that's really key. So, you know, quite often, again, these programs, particularly internally with retailers, certainly 10 years ago, didn't have a lot of internal capability in program management. They would defer to the systems integrators to come in. I think retailers are getting more savvy on program management now, as they've gone through at least one cycle, most of them, of an ERP implementation. And that's really the opportunity, sort of where they come in, SIs come in, they'll internally resource this, but absolutely augment it with external people who have got a sort of a retail background, who can come in and sort of help them steer through the program.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. And your fifth point is to start early.
Yeah, it's quite funny. You should remember a couple of minutes ago I said, and I'm sure everyone has had an experience of this, when you go live with an SAP program, there are two things that are always different on every single program. Number one is data, and by that I mean the data standards, the physical content of the data is different for everyone, right? You have a different way of saying how you want to populate article data information, a different way of capturing customers, etc., etc. So one of the things on data I would say is start cleansing that as soon as possible. And you might think, well, that's difficult because I don't know what the 2B S4 system is going to look like. But one thing is for sure, we know that we have duplicate vendors out there. We have duplicate articles out there. We've probably got a bunch of stock, if we're being honest, in quite a lot of places that sitting on the books doesn't really exist. So you can start doing stock counts, inventory counts, all that sort of good stuff.
Right.
So one of the programs I worked on, we sort of did quite a large international deployment, and it was really going into those countries ahead of the deployment to get them thinking about cleansing data, but actually also what we can also say is actually, if you think about the article master within S4 versus the article master within ECC, what's different, and start capturing new information ready for the program. So I think that would be one. And then the other one I talked about is integration. So
yeah,
you always integrate into different systems, every client, and you're not just integration normally to system, you're normally talking to suppliers and in retail as well. So EDI is a great example of that. And it's again getting ahead of the game and understanding what are our integration methodology going to be. What are we going to think about middleware? What EDI brokers have we got? Do we need to speak to? And it's really getting ahead of the game with that and making sure that we are as crystal clear as possible how we plan to run the program in terms of communicating to systems outside of SAP, but also communicating to externals. And I say in retail, it's mostly vendors that you have that with. So it's trying to build those toolkits on data and integration, because as I said, unless you have infinite time, they're always different and they're always a little bit lumpy as we go live in any program.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. Yeah, so I've got a question, Paul, that a lot of these programs last between, say, 2 and 7 years. You know, they're quite big, kind of long-term programs. How do you kind of keep the engagement of the business and the excitement throughout the whole kind of, you know, that amount of time?
Yes, it's a tough one, that, and it's I don't think there's one answer that fits all, but again, for me, it's always it's almost like a circle. So you've got this sort of the start of the program that says, why are we doing it? We then start this sort of design phase, analyze phase we talked about. But I think first of all, it's really important to celebrate small successes.
Yeah.
So, you know, someone coming out of their business as usual role into a program role for the first time and being able to define and agree what the to-be processes are going to be with their function. I mean, that's amazing, right? That's such a journey for them. So start sort of celebrating that, because quite often we get hung up on, say, time, cost, and quality, and we get hung up on the ultimate goal, which is going live. I think where we are sort of designing to-be processing, we see clear opportunities, you know, benefits. It could be that by putting in UDF, we're going to increase availability by 1%, reduce inventory holding by 4%. I'm just making numbers up. But actually, those benefits we can bake into business as usual objectives. So as we're sort of deploying over multiple years, because quite often the programs at the moment are not going live big bang, you know, we're taking sort of, I'm seeing a lot of retailers sort of de-risking a go live quite rightly by rolling out by category, by store, etc. So it's trying to bake in some of those KPIs or benefits into the business as usual objectives, so we can continually monitor them.
Right. And enjoy the success.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that's quite interesting that we've certainly seen over the last 10, 20 years is people are moving, or retailers are moving more and more away from, I guess, a pull model from store managers ordering inventory to a push model with a centrally sort of centralized forecasting replenishment model. One of the things I've seen on that is actually you see a lot of people who are used to ordering products concerned about how the system's going to work for themselves. So I've always come up with some ways of trying to gamify stuff. You know, so having a look at, having a little bit of fun with the team about, you know, if you were to order X, Y, and Z every week, this is what your store would look like versus what SAP could look like. Right, a bit of gamification. And then the other thing I'd say, these programs, right? So you're absolutely right, Jonathan. I think the longest one I worked on started on year 1 and finished on year 5 or 6. And actually, the why and some of the business initiatives are very different 5 years.
Yeah.
So, exactly. So don't be afraid to course correct. Don't be afraid to rewrite that why statement, you know, and ask yourself, are we still on the same mission? So I think that's really what it's about. Can we make it into business as usual? Can we celebrate some wins? You know, how can we have some fun? How can we bring some of these things like replenishment to life?
That sounds great. Well, yeah, I think that's it then, Paul. So thanks for your time and insight. That was really good to talk through, and yeah, thanks to everybody on the live. Of course, the webinar video will be uploaded to Network Plus, and then it'll go on our website as well with a transcript. We will come back to you with answers to any questions over the next 24 hours. But for now, thanks again, and good to see you, Paul. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.